Hello. So in our last video, we discussed how psychology is a science. It uses the systematic method of empiricism, which is the scientific method. It publishes its findings, so it's common knowledge. It's not hidden behind doors of secrecy. Today, we're going to be discussing how we write about that knowledge that we've obtained scientifically using our scientific method, and that is APA style. So APA style is something commonly used in psych writing, or exclusively, it's pretty much the only writing that psychological research uses. My God, this is off to a riveting start. But we use APA style in psychological writing. So what is APA style? APA stands for the American Psychological Association. It's the format that we will write all papers in this class, and just papers in psychology are written in APA format. Currently, it's in its 7th edition. I think the 7th edition was released about a year or a semester ago. It's hard to tell with COVID. God knows how long it's actually been, but it's the 7th edition is the most recent edition of APA, and it is fairly a recent edition at that. Ooh, man. Anyway, so APA is the style that is used for psychological research, but not every single thing you've ever written has been using APA style. I'm sure a lot of you guys have written an MLA style, which is more common for like English papers and what have you. There's newspapers use the AP style, the Associated Press, and just depending on what it is you're writing about, that's going to dictate what style you're writing in. APA, as we're going to discover, is a lot more straightforward and to the point. We do not use direct quotations ever, but when you're writing English papers, it makes sense to use direct quotations because you might include an excerpt from a book or a poem or what have you, and you are going to describe your interpretation of that. But with APA, we do not do any direct quotations, and we're very straightforward because the stuff we're covering in science tends to be kind of convoluted or can be complex to understand anyway. There's no need to use additional flowery language just to, fill the void. So there are levels of APA style. There is the organization of the paper itself. There's high-level APA style and low-level APA style. These aspects of APA are what you are going to be graded on for your final papers. So these are part of the rubric. This is part of the rubric in terms of the APA portion of your essays. So we'll start with organization. Again, this refers to just the order that the information you have is organized in your APA report. So you'll start with the title page. That seems fairly straightforward. Next follows the abstract, which is just a brief summary of your research. Typically, this is written last because it goes from everything to the methodology that you use to what your results were. And obviously, you can't write an abstract describing what your results were if you haven't, collected your data yet. So again, abstract, even though it's second in the order of APA papers, it's typically one of the last things that you would write. The introduction, this can also be referred to as the literature review, but this is including previous research on your topic of study. When I talked about the scientific method, the research literature aspect of it, that research that you look into, that is going into your introduction section. The method is the next subject, or the next heading, the next portion of your APA paper. This is just how you conducted your study. So what surveys did you use to measure your variable? What is your research design? Is it correlational, quasi-experimental, or just regular experimental? Do you have between or within subjects? How did you get the data is essentially what the method section is covering. The results is describing what you got. So that's describing your results. And oftentimes this is going to include statistics. So did you use Pearson's R correlation coefficients? Did you use an independent samples t-test? Did you use an analysis of variance, etc.? Results section is going to get into that and describing it. The discussion section is just kind of like your conclusion. It summarizes the study briefly in the beginning, and then it talks about the implications. So how can this be applied to the wider realm of psychology in this field? And then lastly is the references section. So this is going to be all the references that you used in your introduction section. You know, you're going to list all the articles that you discussed, as well as if you used a survey that was written and published by another researcher, you're going to include that in your references as well. That is also part of you know, work that you use that needs to be referenced. Appendices or an appendix is also in APA style, but for the simplicity of our class and the research we'll be conducting, I don't think we'll need to use an appendix or use any appendices. So just keep that in mind. Anyway, so for high level APA style, I talked about the organization, high and low level. Now we're going to get into high level APA style. This refers to how the paper or the report sounds. Does it sound like APA? APA is very formal. It doesn't have slang or contractions or humor. So, you know, APA is just a wild ride. It doesn't really use pop culture references unless it's somehow involved in the study itself. So if you're looking at text message lingo or, you know, abbreviations that are commonly used on social media or something, then yes, it would make sense for you to have that in there. But you're not just gonna say, I didn't find shit, man. Like, that's not APA style. So keep in mind that APA, since it's a scientific type of writing, it's used to communicate ideas across researchers to other scientific members of the community. And so it's kept professional. If you say stuff like, oh man, this report sucked, I didn't find a damn thing in my results section, I didn't find any significance, man, this ain't the one. No, you can tell that to your friends, but when you're writing about it and reporting on it, you are not going to speak like that in APA format. And this should just be common for any sort of report that you write in, be it MLA or AP or APA. You really shouldn't be using slang or being too, you know, don't be too liberal with how much swear you use. In fact, don't actually. But anyway, so kind of imagine that when you're writing in APA style, imagine that you're writing to a professor or other professionals that, you know, to kind of keep you in check in terms of you start sliding towards the more slang or casual, not so formal direction of your paper. Another thing with APA is that it's incredibly straightforward. As I mentioned before, APA is used for scientific writing. The stuff we deal with in science is complicated enough as it is. You know, we have a lot of theories, we have a lot of different explanations to complex phenomenon. And so if we have really overly complicated language to explain it, it's not really getting our point across. Keep in mind that APA is used to communicate ideas from one person to another. And so if you're not straightforward with that explanation, it makes it difficult and it just strays from APA format. So there's not really much need for word count for APA. So I've had a lot of people ask me in terms of the papers, oh, how long does it have to be? Or, oh, you know, do we have a certain word count? Never. We will not have a word count. In terms of the page length I'll give you guys, it's not like it has to meet that page number, but it's more so, I would expect that with a 7 article, for your final projects, for example, your introduction section should include 7 peer-reviewed articles that you discuss. I wouldn't expect that to be less than about 3 pages, 2 or 3 pages. If it is, but you still relay to me all the information, I still understand what you're saying and you're straightforward and I'm picking up what you're putting down, okay, it can be 2 pages and it'll be fine. But you can also have a 6-page introduction or a literature review and it can be absolute garbage because you're not telling me anything. So page length or word counts isn't as important as, are you communicating to me the ideas that need to be communicated? Are you telling me what needs to be known? So to kind of give you an example of being straightforward, APA style is going to say like, oh, the current study implemented a between subjects design. The experimental group listened to classical music for an hour while studying test materials. The control group did not listen to any music while studying test materials. Instantly, I know that, okay, it's between subjects, so that means that people in one condition, be it listening to classical music or not listening to any music, they didn't switch over. They stayed in that condition. Whereas So with APA style, you can write saying it between subjects design. You don't necessarily have to explain it in terms of what is between subjects design. You say the experimental group, boom, the control group, boom, then you move on with your life. Not APA style, we have the current study implemented a between subjects design. This means that two groups were tested, with one being in an experimental group and the other in a control group. There was no overlap between participants. The first group was the experimental group. This group listened to classical music for 1 hour while studying test materials. Second group was what was known as a control group. These participants did not listen to any music while studying test materials. You have so many extra words in there and so much additional explanation to things that don't need to be explained. Like, assume with APA style writing, when you write between or within subjects design, keep in mind who's reading it. It's researchers, it's people that are in the scientific community, so they know at least what between subjects design is, because it's true for all types of research in psychology. It's well-known vernacular, between or within subjects design, and it's just kind of part of knowing research. So that part you don't need to explain. And then you get into, oh, two groups were tested, one being experimental and one being control, no overlap. The first group was the experimental group. You're kind of just being redundant at this point. You're saying the same thing over and over again. Whereas when you look at the example for APA style, it's between subjects design, experimental group did this, control group did this. You didn't say, oh, there were two groups, one experimental, one control. This is what the experimental did. You can just get right into it. So just kind of work on that. I know this APA writing can be difficult to kind of learn or to write in if you're not used to it, because you're so, you want to explain it. You want to say like, oh, between subjects design, this is what that is. You don't necessarily have to do that. So I mentioned how APA style does not have direct quotations, and there's a reason for that. So these are just a few things that the APA style features, and then essentially why it does that for the scientific community. So I'll just go over this first one. There are a few direct quotations of other researchers, if any at all. I would encourage you to just avoid direct quotes from any researchers. But the reason for this is not to be a stickler, not to be a dick, but it's more so because these things that you're discussing that other researchers have looked into are objective. They're not really, they're pretty much the same across the board. So it's not like you have to use the exact wording that another researcher used. It's objective. Their wording of it is not going to dictate its meaning. It means the same thing regardless. So you shouldn't have to rely on another researcher to explain something that's objective to your audience when you write your papers. So you guys can read through these. I'm not going to read through each of them right now because you guys have access to this PowerPoint. But essentially, the features that we have in APA, there are reasons for that. So this kind of gets into some of them. So low APA style, so we have the organization, we have high level APA style where it sounds like APA. Low level is where it looks like APA. And so this is just kind of your common proper spelling and grammar. You want to make sure that you use proper in-text and citations, as well as correct APA formatting for your reference page. So there's a way to cite articles in APA, both in the research, in the paper itself, and then at the end at the reference page. There's an APA way to do that. Another thing is figures and tables. These are also formatted in APA. And then reporting statistics, that is also done in a particular style according to APA. So low-level APA, excuse me, low-level APA is just all about, does it look like it? You know, when you cite articles in APA, it's supposed to look a certain way. You're supposed to have authors and years, or the reference page has to have the title of the article, the title of the journal, the author, the year, etc. Is that there, essentially? So some common low-level mistakes for APA, excuse me, the use of numbers. So when you have numbers that are below 10, so anything 0 through 9, you will write it out. If you say you have, 3 conditions, you will write out THREE, 3 conditions. But when you say you have 422 participants, you don't actually have to type FOURNUD or HUNDRED. You don't have to write out the word 422, if that's the number I said. You will just write the actual numbers 422. So long as the numbers are 10 and up, so once it gets double digits, you're just going to write the number itself. It's as opposed to spelling out the number. Excuse me. And again, these are some of the common ones. One thing that I find really common too is the use of the ampersand, this number 10 here, the use of ampersand in references. So I'm going to get more into detail about that, but people often confuse when to use an ampersand and when to use the word and when it comes to in-text citations, and I'll help you clear that up. But again, these are some of the common low-level mistakes. So as you're writing your papers, your practice studies, your final reports, look over this and make sure that you're not making these mistakes as well. So writing a research report in APA, again, this is the organization of it. So this is the order that it has to be in. It has to be presented in this order. I'm going to go into a little bit of detail as to what each of these sections contain and what they look like for the most part. So the title page, that's easy. It's just going to be the title of your paper, your name, and then your affiliation. So in our case, your affiliation is the university that you're writing this paper for. So that would be California State University, comma, Fresno. It's not Fresno State. I know that's kind of what we call it because it's like, ooh, cool. But anyway, I don't think cool is the way to describe that. But you're going to write out the full name of the university that you are writing this for, which is California State University, Fresno. You'll have the title of your paper at the top, and then your name. You can include your middle initial if you're so inclined. You don't necessarily have to, but your name and then the California State University, Fresno. So that's the first page. The title page only contains this. So once you get into the abstract, you're starting a brand new page. There should be nothing on the title page other than those three things that I just talked about. So on the page following the title page, ooh, so many page, you are going to write the brief summary of your study. Again, the abstract, that's the only thing that's on this page. Keep in mind that when you look at peer-reviewed articles on Psych Info or Google Scholar or whatever database you're looking into, they oftentimes will have the title page or the abstract and the introduction all on the same page. Articles that you read in journals through Google Scholar or Psych Info or whatever, they are not written in APA format. At least the organization is not. The abstract, when you turn in the final report to Simran or Javier, to your TA, this is going to be on its own page. The title page and the abstract are on two separate pages, and those are the only things on that page. That's it. Next is the introduction. This is the start of the third page. So you have your title page, then you go to the next page, you have your abstract, then you go to the next page. At the very top of the third page, you're going to start your introduction. Now, the heading of this section is not called introduction. It's actually the title of your paper. So that would be, in this case, differences in student engagement between face-to-face and online introductory statistics courses. That would be the heading of my introduction section, not introduction, not literature review, but the full title of my paper. So the opening paragraph, the first paragraph of your introduction is introducing the theme and the focus of the paper. This is where you introduce your variables, kind of briefly describe what those are. And then the following paragraphs are going to cover the research. You're going to discuss the research that's related to those variables, related to your focus of the paper. And then finally, your last paragraph is going to briefly describe your method. So my kind of suggestion is for each article that you're discussing, have a new paragraph for it. So if you have 7 peer-reviewed articles that you'll need for your final paper, which you will, that would be 7 individual paragraphs for each of those articles. That's just a kind of a simple way to organize it in your head. If you're not sure how it's supposed to look or not sure what goes where, that would be an easy start. And maybe as you're writing it, you can find a way to kind of combine some paragraphs together if they have similar themes. But for the time being, if you're having troubles figuring out what goes where or how to put it together, I would just have 1 paragraph per each article. I don't have the box, honey. Go look for it. Go. Amelia, it's not in here. It might be in your room. Close the door, please. Thank you, love. Okay. So that last paragraph of your introduction is used as a transition into your method section. So as opposed to just saying, that's all, folks, boom, method. You're going to briefly describe, you're kind of going to bring all the articles and your research together and say, oh, you know, this article kind of looked into this aspect of student engagement. This one looked in, I'm using this one to, I'm following the methods of so-and-so, I'm going to do this, da, da, da. You can combine all that in the last paragraph, kind of summarize the research that you've described in the previous 7 or 8 paragraphs. And then you're going to say, oh, the current study. So when you briefly describe your method, you can say the current study uses a within subjects correlational design administered through an online survey or something like that. Just a brief description of what's coming up in your method. No need to get in super detail because you're going to get into your method after that. So in-text citations, I'm going to talk about these now because they're related to, they're oftentimes heavy in the introduction section. Since this is where you discuss previous research, previous peer-reviewed journals, it makes sense that this is where I'm going to talk to you guys about in-text citations because your introduction is where a majority, if not all of them, are going to be. So when you are referring to an article in your introduction section or in your method section, possibly, but again, primarily in your introduction section, you're going to use in-text citations. Now, there's 2 ways to do this. There are parenthetical and non-parenthetical citations. Both of them are correct. Feel free to switch them up and mix them up as you're writing your papers, but so long as you write them in the proper APA style, it doesn't matter which one you use, if it's parenthetical or non-parenthetical. So with parenthetical, typically this is where you include this citation at the end of a sentence. So student engagement is different between online and face-to-face classes. A parenthetical citation includes both the author name and the year in parentheses. Parenthetical just refers to everything that's supposed to be in an in-text citation, which is the author's last names, I should specify, and the year. All of that information is in parentheses. And you'll see the difference between parenthetical and non-parenthetical citations. But parenthetical has all the information you need for in-text citations in parentheses. Typically, these are used at the end of a sentence because since they're in parentheses, it's kind of bulky and gross if you have it to start a sentence like, parentheses, Cooper, comma, 2016, student engagement is different, like, and we'll see kind of a difference between writing with parenthetical in-text citations and non-parenthetical in-text citations. But again, typically parenthetical kind of put at the end. So you state, you know, something that that researcher, that article brought up, and then you include that citation at the end. When there are 2 authors, you will include an ampersand. So if it's in the parentheses, like parenthetical citations are, if everything's in the parentheses, you are going to use an ampersand within. So Cooper or Cooper ampersand McCready, comma, 2019, that is how you would write if there's more than one author in parenthetical citations. Now, one of the updates with the 7th edition of APA is that if there are more than 2 authors that wrote an article that you're referencing, you will just automatically include et al. So you'll still include the first author's last name, so Cooper or Anderson or whatever that author's last name is, whatever. You'll include that and then just et al. Period after the AL, comma, insert year here. So there, in this citation, this sarcasm and sass is appreciated, but there's a time and place for it, not in APA. But with this Cooper et al., there could be 7 authors here, and it's still et al. Or there can be 3 authors there, because that's, again, more than 2. Cooper et al. Is still going to be how you cite it. Or, again, first author, the first author that's listed, their last name, et al., comma, the year it was published. That is parenthetical in-text citations. For non-parenthetical in-text citations, these are kind of a part of the sentence. So this is where, as opposed to parenthetical citations where Everything you need, the author's last names and the year are all in parentheses. For non-parenthetical, it's only the year that's in parentheses. So Cooper, 2016, concluded that there's a difference in student engagement between online and face-to-face courses. That is a non-parenthetical in-text citation. Notice how it's more a part of the sentence as opposed to parenthetical in-text citations, which could say, there is a difference in student engagement between online and face-to-face courses, Cooper 2016 in parentheses. Non-parenthetical kind of flows a little better. So it's, it reads more like, oh, you're writing, it's part of the sentence. It's not just you say something and there's a citation, but it's more a part of the vernacular and the sentence itself. When there are two authors, you are going to use the actual word and. So when you have the authors outside of parentheses, you're going to use the word and. If they're in parentheses, then you're going to use an ampersand. So again, this is kind of the same stuff. Cooper and McCready, not Cooper ampersand McCready, because there is no parentheses that's covering or encapsulating the author's names. They're separate from the parentheses that you have for the year. So you will use the actual word and. Again, because it's like part of the sentence itself, and we don't really use a lot of symbols in terms of when we're writing sentences in APA. We don't really use those shorthands in the sentence proper. But in parentheses, if something's in parentheses, we will use the ampersand. If not, we'll use the word and itself. And again, as an update from the 7th edition, if you have more than 2 authors, you're still going to use et al. Off the bat. So that would be Cooper, or again, whatever the first author's last name is, et al. And then the 2019 is in parentheses. This is still a non-parenthetical citation. So now we're getting into the method section. So those in-text citations, those are going to be most important for your intro since they include so many different articles that you're referencing. For your method section, you could include in-text citations, but it just depends. But one thing about the method section is that when you are titling it, it is method. It is one method. You're not going to title it as methods. I think oftentimes students think it's the methods section because we say it so quickly, the method section, but it is just method. Now, you don't have to start a new page for your method section. Keep in mind that the title and abstract are all on their own pages. They start a new page, they end the page, that's it, that's the page. If your introduction section ends at like halfway down in a new page, you can start the method section just right underneath that. You don't have to start a completely new page for your method section. So for that, as I mentioned, the method section is explaining how you conducted your study. I think about the method section as like a recipe. So when you have a recipe, you know, you write down like, oh, you know, 2 cups of flour, 3 grams of sugar. Okay, I don't know why I'm switching up the delivery format here. You have this much, you know, chocolate chips. You have this much baking soda. You have this much flour. I've already said flour, but anyway, when you have a recipe, you write everything that you needed to make the cookies, and then you explain, okay, preheat your oven to 350 degrees, mix your dry ingredients, mix your wet ingredients. Recipe is clearly describing how you made these cookies, or again, whatever it is that you're making. And it's able to, you know, I can write a recipe here in Fresno, California, and send it to someone who lives in Connecticut, in Hartford, Connecticut, and they can read that so long as they read and understand English, because that's what it was written in. They can read that recipe and do everything the exact same that I did. Same thing for your method. You're going to say, oh, it's a between subjects experimental design. What I did was, although you're not going to use I and we statements in APA format, so I'm getting a little informal here, but you'll say the current study gathered 200 participants, and you know, you'll state your sample size, how many men and women participated, and how they were recruited. So, oh, there was a total of 200 people, 100 men, 100 women, and they were recruited through social media. I posted this on, you know, different social media outlets, and people responded, and that's how they were a part of the study. The participants section is super easy. But again, it's showing, it's this recipe. It's showing how many chocolate chips you put in your barrel of sample. That sounds weird. But it's showing how many, you know, of your ingredients that you have. You had 200 people, 100 men, 100 women, etc. So with the method, this section has subheadings and they're listed here. So you'll have your main method heading and that's centered. And then you'll have a subheading. It's going to start like not in the center, but more to the left as you normally would start everything else. And it's going to say participants. And in that section, it's the easiest section to write because you again just state your sample size, how many men and women participated. You're also going to say the average age. So, you know, of these 200 people, the average age was 29.5 years old or something like that. Whatever the average age of your participants is, you're going to post that. And then how they were recruited. Again, they were recruited through, you know, following a link on social media that was posted by the researchers or what have you. The next section is the design and procedures section. Now, sometimes you'll see articles that split the design and procedure section into their own separate headings. So you'll have participants, design, and then procedure. Or sometimes you'll see things like a materials section being its own little subheading in methods, in the method section, excuse me. But for the sake of our class, since I don't think we're going to really have super complicated studies, because oftentimes people do that, researchers make more headings like that because the methods that they're using are a little more complicated, or they have a lot of conditions, or their materials that they're using require more explanation. I don't think you guys are going to need that. So when it comes to your papers, you're going to have the subheadings of participants and design and procedure within your method section. Now with that, with the design and procedure subheading, you're going to discuss what your study design was. Hence, this is your design. This is the design portion of design and procedure. So was it between and within, subjects design? Did you use an experiment? Were you looking at correlation? Do you have independent variables and dependent variables? You know, make sure you get into that detail. And then the procedure is just, what did you do? So if you did an online survey, you know, we recruited participants by sending them the link. They participated, they they filled out the informed consent, they filled out the demographics questions, and then they addressed our 2 variables in question. So I'm getting into really minimal detail here, but essentially the procedure section where you describe what you did is where you're going to get into, we measured, you know, depression through using the Beck depression inventory. And then you can include a couple example questions from that. Or, we looked at self-esteem, so we used the Rosenberg self-esteem scale and include a couple example questions from that. I always suggest that when you are using surveys in your studies to measure a certain variable, that you always include a couple examples of the questions that are on that survey. So then participants or people that read the study or read your paper can kind of see, okay, how were they measuring self-esteem? There's a couple questions. Okay, I have an idea. Next is the results section. Again, wherever your method section finishes, be it the middle of a page or like 3/4 down or 1/4 down, your results section can just start immediately following, like just hit enter, start a new line, and then just start getting into your results section. You don't have to start a brand new page for each section from here. So this is where you'll state your findings. So you'll need to not only include your statistical analyses of your independent samples t-tests or ANOVA or more of your inferential statistics, which we'll get into, but you'll also need to mention the mean and standard deviations for your variables. So it's not just, t-tests, they're done. You need to explain a little more than that. So they must be reported in APA format. So in terms of the numbers that contain decimals, like you see here, 5.22, that's been rounded to the nearest 100th or 2 decimal places. So if you find the average of something and like, the average depression score was, once I did it in Excel, was 5.2165, that's not how you're going to report that average in APA style. You're going to say, the average depression score was 5.22, because again, you have to round it to 2 decimal places. And this goes for your average age. You're probably not going to have an average age right on the dot of like, oh, it's 23.00. Chances are there's probably going to be decimals. So you're going to want to make sure you include that and round it to 2 decimal places. So the inferential statistics, like the t-tests, or if you're using ANOVA or Pearson's R or what have you, each are reported differently in APA. And as we get closer to writing the results section for this class, as we get closer to that section, or to worrying about how to report results in APA style, we'll get into that. But for now, let's just kind of stick with the basics. So the discussion section is where you kind of bring it all together. This is where you say, okay, so we were looking, with our between subjects design, we were looking at the difference between online and face-to-face learners and face-to-face, statistics classes in terms of their student engagement. We found statistical significance. It turns out that, you just kind of briefly describe what happened in your study. So your discussion section includes the summary of your research, which is what I just described, theoretical implications. So kind of describing how you got their results through theoretical means. So how can this be applied in the theoretical aspect? Does this kind of tie into other theories that you've read in your introduction section? In those articles that you looked at, they discuss theories. Do your results kind of fit into the theories they discussed? The practical implications. This is, okay, so I was looking at face-to-face and online learners and statistics when it came to student engagement. A practical application of that is, hey, if I found that the behavioral student engagement, which is actually engaging in the class in terms of completing homework or, participating in class discussion or stuff like that, more things you do in class, I found that the behavioral student engagement was higher in face-to-face classes than it was in online classes. So the practical implication of that is, hey, if you know that you have troubles completing your homework or kind of staying on top of things, perhaps online learning isn't for you. And yes, I understand the irony of me saying this, considering we have to be in online classes this semester, which is neat, but ultimately, I think that was definitely a practical implication of the research that I conducted for my master's thesis. Now, limitations, I find it's often easy for students to go on a long tangent on their limitations, where that's the only part they have in their discussion section. But keep in mind, all these things I'm mentioning are things that should be in your discussion section. So your limitations, this can be, oh, we didn't have a big enough sample size. Although be careful with that. There's always more limitations that you have than just sample size. It could be, oh, well, we used a correlational design. So since we used a correlational study design, we can't really imply any causation. We can't say that this variable caused changes in the other because it's correlational. We can't make that statement. Or, oh, we used a between subjects design, so there are limitations that just naturally occur with between subjects design. Or, oh, we used it within subjects design. There are natural limitations that apply to those. And as we get further in the class, as we start discussing those different research designs, research methods, I will discuss the limitations of those as well. So when you're left with writing your discussion section and discussing your limitations, you'll have something to go on as opposed to just, here, figure it out. And then lastly, your discussion section concludes with the suggestions for future research. You don't necessarily have to go into too much detail. You don't have to provide me a whole spiel about a brand new research project, just some ideas, and that should be fine. So APA style references. So I talked about in-text citations, the parenthetical in-text citations, which have the author's last names and the year in the parentheses, and then the non-parenthetical in-text citations, which just had the year in parentheses. Well, the references page is where you're going to fill in all that other information that we didn't have in the article, or excuse me, in the report proper. So this is where you are going to list them in alphabetical order by the author's last names, the first author's last names. And I'll get into a little more detail about that because it can be kind of confusing. So the general format for an APA style reference is going to be, this one has 3 authors. So we have author, their last name is author, and then comma AA, so their first and middle name initial. Sometimes they don't include a middle name, so you don't have to worry about it, but you will have their last name, comma, and their first name initial, period, comma, and then followed by the second author, period, comma, ampersand, and then the final author's name. Now your year is in parentheses, followed by a period. The title of the article. So the title of the article is not going to be capitalized like a title is that you would see in like a book or something. Pretty much the first word is going to be capitalized. And then if you have punctuation like a colon or a period or a question mark, the word following that punctuation will be capitalized. And then any proper nouns like United States of America or, you know, Costa Rica or what have you, those will be capitalized. But everything else in the article, in the title of the article, is lowercase. Just that first word is always capitalized. Any word following punctuation that's not a comma is going to be capitalized, and then proper nouns are capitalized. That's followed by a period. And then you have the title of the journal. So this is italicized. And it is, this is capitalized like a proper title is. So if your journal is the Journal of Psychological Sciences, it's going to be capital J and then of. The of doesn't have to be capitalized, but capital J, Journal of, capital P, Psychological, capital S, Sciences, and then boom. So then you have a comma, and the volume number is also italicized, followed by the issue number. In parentheses, the issue is not italicized, and then comma, page number, so like 600 to 625 or something, period. So a lot of times I have students confusing which is the volume number and which is the issue number. It'll say on the article. If you need help kind of deciphering that, you can talk to myself or your TA. But in terms of which number, I also have students kind of mixing up mixing up those numbers here, or mixing up which is italicized and which is just in parentheses for the reference. My suggestion is that the volume number is drinking. And so when the volume number drinks, it's leaning, it can't stand up straight. It's like, oh man, those schnapps were pretty great, huh, Freud? Or whatever, Freud. But anyway, so the issue, or the volume number is on its side, it's wasted. It's been having too much to drink. Now the issue number is in parentheses. You keep your issues to yourself, unless you're in a volume number and you're wasted, but that's not the point here. You keep your issues to yourself, so they're in parentheses. They're in a nice little box, no one knows about them. Don't talk to people about your issues, although that's terrible. You probably should talk to people about your issues, but for the sake of the APA reference, don't talk to people about your issues. The issues are in parentheses, and they are sober as a gober, that's not a thing, but they are upright and they are in their little parenthesis bubble. So you don't talk about your issues, you keep them closed inside as the parentheses, and the volume is wasted and it's just italicized and I can't stand up straight. If that helps, good. If not, then you just got to see me pretend like I was drunk. But anyway, so I mentioned how references are meant to be listed in alphabetical order according to the first author's last name. Now that's a lot of additional explanation, but essentially every APA, every article that you read is going to have authors' names listed. And it's going to be, you know, you'll have McCulloch and Monroe, or you'll have Al-Marghani and Mijatovic. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing those correctly, so I apologize if you know how these are pronounced and I just butchered them. But essentially, every article that you read is going to have a list of authors, or if it's just one, you don't have to worry about it. But if there's more than one, which oftentimes many journal articles do have more than one author, they are listed in a specific order. Sometimes they might be alphabetical just by pure accident, but in APA, when we list our authors in an order, that order is for a reason. The first author that's listed did the most work in terms of this article. The second author did the second most work, the third did the third most work, etc., all the way down the line, to the point where the 20th author was just, he brought coffee in one time or something, I don't know. But the first author did the most work. So when you see an article in APA style, when you're looking up articles and you see the authors listed, don't change up the order. Don't alphabetize them if they're not in alphabetical order for one article. Keep the order of the authors in the article listed in the same order. These just happen to be alphabetical, so this probably isn't the best explanation. But here, Al-Marghani did the most work, and then Mijatovic, he did, or actually they did, the next most work. But Al-Marghani did the most, so their name is first. McCullough, whatever, they did the most work, so their name is listed first. And Monroe was like, they did the second most work or whatever, and Witten did just everything. But essentially, this first author always stays the same. So within one article, don't change the order that the authors are presented, but by the author, the first author's last name. So the first author's last name for these are Al-Marghani, McCullough, and then, well, Witten, the only author. For these articles, you know, you keep this and you alphabetize it by their last name. So A comes before M, which comes before W. So this is how you would list that. So again, it's by the first author's last name, and you alphabetize them like so. So if we had a first author's last name that started with a Q, it would go after McCullough, but then before Witten. Simple. If you have any questions regarding APA format, don't hesitate to ask me or your TA. We know APA format, and if any part of this was a little confusing or what have you, again, don't hesitate to contact us, and we can sort that out. But that is APA style writing. That is how we write about psychology when we've conducted the research, when we've done the work, and we want to share it with other people through that public knowledge that's created through scientific research. Again, if you have questions, just let us know and we'll be happy to answer them. But that is all, folks. So like and subscribe.